There exists a decision that seems impossible to make, yet a part of you knows it must be made. It's when you look at that person you recognized as your twin flame, at that connection that awakened layers of your soul you didn't even know existed, and you realize that the love that should be liberating has become a prison. When you realize that the journey that began as a sacred encounter between two souls has now transformed into repetitive cycles of pain, emotional dependence, and stagnation that's preventing you from becoming who you truly came to be in this lifetime. It's the moment when your soul whispers a truth your mind refuses to accept, that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to break a sacred bond. That not all soul contracts come to be fulfilled until the end. Some come to be consciously terminated when they've served their purpose. And that you, even while loving deeply, have the power to say no to a destiny that no longer serves the growth of either party. But here's what almost no one tells you about being the one who breaks a soul contract with your twin flame. This decision doesn't just change your life, it completely rewrites the structure of your spiritual reality. Carl Jung said that some of the most sacred moments of the human journey happen when we have the courage to choose our own evolution, even when it means letting go of what we love most. When you're the one making this difficult decision, when you're the one finding strength to consciously end a twin flame journey, 5 extraordinary transformations begin to happen in your life. Transformations that will show you that breaking a soul contract isn't a betrayal of destiny, but can be the most courageous and spiritually mature decision you've ever made. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you stay until the end, you'll discover why Jung believed that some souls come to this life specifically to learn the sacred art of loving without losing yourself, of connecting without limiting yourself, of honoring spiritual bonds through your own ability to release when love demands liberation. Because maybe you haven't failed in the twin flame journey. Maybe you've been graduated to a much more advanced level of spiritual consciousness, where true love doesn't manifest through union, but through the wisdom of recognizing when it's time to leave. Jung didn't speak specifically about soul contracts, but his studies on the individuation process, on the transcendent function, and on the human capacity to choose one's own destiny, provide the most solid foundation for understanding these seemingly impossible decisions. A soul contract isn't an inflexible agreement signed before birth that must be fulfilled regardless of circumstances. It's a dynamic plan that evolves as both souls evolve, and that can be consciously redirected when it serves the greater growth of both. Jung understood that human life operates through constant polarities, and one of the deepest tensions is between destiny and free will. Some encounters seem orchestrated by forces that transcend our understanding, as if two souls had truly agreed to meet to awaken each other. But Jung also knew that the development of human consciousness depends fundamentally on our capacity to make conscious choices, even when these choices contradict patterns that seemed predetermined. When you break a soul contract with your twin flame, you're not violating a cosmic law. You're exercising a transcendent function, the ability to synthesize apparently irreconcilable opposites. You're simultaneously honoring the love you feel, and recognizing that this love, in the way it manifested, is no longer serving the evolutionary purpose of either of you. Many people confuse attachment with spiritual love, dependence with sacred connection, familiarity with destiny. A true twin flame journey should result in greater freedom, greater authenticity, greater capacity to love without possessing. When the result is the opposite, when you feel more limited, more anxious, more dependent on the other's approval and presence, then the connection has departed from its original purpose and transformed into something that hinders rather than facilitates growth. The decision to break the contract arises when you develop enough clarity to distinguish between what your soul truly needs and what your emotional mind desires. It's a moment of extraordinary spiritual maturity where you manage to look beyond the intensity of feelings and honestly evaluate whether the dynamic between you is creating more consciousness or more unconsciousness, more freedom or more limitation, more self-love or more self-abandonment. This ability to choose consciously, even against our deepest impulses, is what distinguishes us as human beings capable of transcending the automatic patterns of the psyche. It's what allows us to evolve beyond conditionings, whether they're personal, cultural, or even spiritual. When you make this decision, when you find courage to say that true love sometimes requires separation, you're positioning yourself not as a victim of spiritual circumstances, but as a conscious agent of your own evolution. And the universe responds to this position in a way that few can imagine. The first transformation that happens when you consciously break a soul contract is paradoxically liberating and terrifying. You experience the radical return to individual sovereignty. It's as if, during all the time you were connected with your twin flame, a part of you had been loaned out, merged, operating through the dynamic of the two. And now, suddenly, you need to learn to function again as a complete and autonomous unit. Jung understood that intense relationships, especially those that touch deep archetypal layers, create a kind of psychological fusion where the boundaries between self and other become porous. During the twin flame journey, you may have gotten used to feeling her emotions as if they were your own, making decisions always considering how she would react, validating your own perceptions through the mirror she represented. This fusion can seem sacred and transcendent, but it can also become a subtle form of avoiding total responsibility for your own life. When you break the contract, this fusion dissolves abruptly. Suddenly, you need to feel your own emotions without the filter of her presence. You need to make decisions based exclusively on your own inner compass. You need to validate your perceptions through your own connection to truth, not through the reflection you saw in her eyes. This transition can be disorienting because you were accustomed to operating as half of a larger system. The return to individual sovereignty manifests first through a strange feeling of inner silence. You might wake up and realize you're no longer automatically tuned into her emotional state. You no longer know instinctively how she's feeling, what she's doing, what she's dreaming about. This silence can initially be disturbing because you had gotten used to this subtle telepathic connection as part of your daily reality. But then you begin to perceive that in this silence there's an immense space that now belongs entirely to you. Mental space that was previously occupied with thoughts about her, worries about the relationship, analyses about the dynamic between you, emotional space that was previously dedicated to processing not only your own experiences, but also the energetic reverberations of the connection. This recovered space is like virgin territory of your own consciousness, that you can now explore and inhabit fully. Many people are afraid of solitude not because they don't enjoy their own company, but because they never learned to fully inhabit their own consciousness. The fusion with the twin flame can become a sophisticated form of avoiding this confrontation with your own totality. When you break the contract, you're forced to rediscover who you are when you're not being defined in relation to another person, even a person who represents your cosmic counterpart. This rediscovery can reveal aspects of your personality that had been suppressed or modified to accommodate the connection's dynamic. You might realize you had opinions, preferences, dreams that you had unconsciously adjusted to maintain the harmony or intensity of the bond with her. You might discover talents, interests, ways of expressing yourself that had remained dormant because they didn't find space in the shared identity you had constructed. The return to sovereignty also brings with it a responsibility that can be initially overwhelming. When you operate within a twin flame connection, many choices are made considering the impact on the dynamic between you two. When you break the contract, all choices become exclusively yours, and you need to develop internal criteria for decisions that were previously made through the lens of the connection. This total responsibility for your own life can awaken deep fears about your ability to navigate existence autonomously. You might question whether you can be happy alone, whether you can make good decisions without her opinion, whether you can maintain your connection to the sacred without the amplification she represented. These fears are natural, but they're also opportunities to discover internal reservoirs of strength and wisdom you didn't know you possessed. The most transformative aspect of returning to sovereignty is that you begin to develop a different relationship with the concept of love. During the twin flame connection, love may have become something you felt for someone specific, something that depended on her presence and reciprocity to exist fully. When you break the contract and return to individual sovereignty, you're forced to discover love as a state of being that you cultivate independently of any external connection. The second transformation is even more profound and mysterious. You develop transdimensional perception of consequences. It's as if, by making the conscious decision to break the contract, you gained access to a form of vision that transcends linear reality and allowed you to simultaneously perceive multiple layers of consequences of your choice, including some that haven't yet manifested in the physical world. Jung extensively studied the phenomenon of synchronicity and realized that certain human decisions, especially those involving deep archetypal aspects of the psyche, create ripples in the structure of reality that extend far beyond the immediate moment and context of the decision. When you break a soul contract, you're not just ending a personal connection, You're modifying energetic patterns that can have ramifications through generations, influencing not only your own evolutionary trajectory, but also hers, and potentially that of people you don't even know yet. This transdimensional perception manifests first through sudden insights about how your decision is affecting her on levels that transcend the obviously emotional. You might perceive that, even while suffering from the separation, a deep part of her soul is being liberated to explore aspects of herself that can only develop in the absence of the intensity of the connection between you. You might see that your courage to leave is giving her permission to also find forms of growth that were impossible within the dynamic you had created. Jung understood that sometimes we love someone so intensely that we unconsciously prevent their growth. We create an energetic field so comfortable and familiar that the person doesn't feel the need to expand beyond the limits they know. When you break the contract, you might be offering her the most precious gift one soul can give another: the opportunity to discover her own completeness without depending on any external connection, even a sacred connection. The transdimensional perception also includes a direct understanding of how your decision is influencing familial and ancestral patterns. You might perceive that you are repeating dynamics that exist in your lineage for generations, patterns of spiritual codependency disguised as transcendent love, and that your conscious choice to break the contract is literally healing ancestral wounds related to the inability to love without losing oneself. This perception can be simultaneously comforting and responsibility-bearing. Comforting, because you understand that your individual decision has much greater meaning than you imagined, that you're contributing to the collective evolution of human consciousness about what it means to love maturely. Responsibility-bearing, because you perceive that you carry not only the personal consequences of your choice, but also the responsibility to demonstrate through your own life that it's possible to love deeply and still choose freedom when love demands that choice. The transdimensional perception frequently includes visions or insights about possible futures that open as a result of your decision. You might perceive opportunities for growth, connections, experiences that only become possible because you had the courage to end a journey that had fulfilled its transformative purpose. You might see that your soul had planned not only the encounter with her, but also the moment of departure, as two equally important phases of your spiritual evolution. People who develop transdimensional perception frequently become pioneers of new ways of relating, because they viscerally understand that true love sometimes requires choices that challenge romantic and even spiritual conventions. They become living examples that it's possible to honor a sacred connection through one's own ability to liberate it when it has already fulfilled its function. This perception can also include an understanding of how your decision is contributing to her evolution. Even if she initially experiences only pain and confusion, you might perceive that you're offering her an opportunity to discover internal reservoirs of strength that can only be accessed when all external crutches, including the crutch of a soul connection, are consciously removed. That your departure might be the catalyst for her to develop a form of self-love that was impossible, while part of her identity was being defined through the connection with you. The third transformation can be the most emotionally challenging, but also the most spiritually liberating. You experience the regenerative collapse of the savior archetype. During the twin flame journey, it's common for one or both people to unconsciously assume the role of the other's savior, believing that their special connection has the power to heal deep wounds, resolve old traumas, complete incomplete aspects of the other's personality. Jung understood that the savior archetype is one of the most seductive traps of the human psyche, because it offers a sense of purpose and meaning that seems to transcend the personal ego. When you believe you were sent to save someone, especially someone you recognize as your twin flame, it feeds a narrative about your own importance and mission that can become addictive. You feel special, chosen, essential for the other person's well-being and evolution. But Jung also knew that the savior archetype, when not consciously integrated, can become a sophisticated form of avoiding the real work of personal development. It's easier and more gratifying to try to save another person than to do the arduous and less dramatic work of healing your own wounds, integrating your own shadows, developing your own inner completeness. When you break the soul contract, you're forced to confront the possibility that your need to save her was actually a projection of your own unresolved salvation needs. That part of the connection's intensity came not from the mutual recognition of two complete souls, but from the unconscious dance between two people trying to heal through each other. The collapse of the savior archetype manifests through a series of perceptions that can be initially devastating to the ego. You might realize that many of your apparently altruistic actions toward her were motivated by an unconscious need to feel necessary, important, indispensable. That part of your love was contaminated by a fantasy that you had the power to fix aspects of her life that she herself couldn't fix. This perception can generate deep guilt because you question the authenticity of your motives, the purity of your feelings. This guilt is actually a healthy signal that you're developing a more sophisticated level of self-knowledge, capable of distinguishing between genuine love and egoic needs disguised as spirituality. The regenerative aspect of the collapse happens when you realize that, by giving up trying to save her, you're actually offering her the deepest possible respect, the recognition that she's a complete and capable soul, perfectly equipped to navigate her own evolutionary journey. That your function wasn't to be her savior, but to be a temporary catalyst for her to discover her own capacity for inner salvation. When two people can relate without either assuming the role of the other's savior, they create space for a much more mature and sustainable form of love. A love that celebrates autonomy instead of creating dependence, that offers support without assuming responsibility for the other's happiness, that recognizes that each soul has its own timing and method of growth. The collapse of the savior archetype also frees an immense amount of energy that was previously invested in trying to heal, fix, improve another person's life. This energy can now be redirected to the much more appropriate and effective project of healing, fixing, and improving your own life. You discover that you have internal resources you didn't even know you possessed, when you're not spending most of your vital force trying to be the solution to another person's problems. This redistribution of energy frequently results in surprising advances in your own life. Projects that were stagnant suddenly gain momentum. Talents that were dormant begin to flourish. Aspects of your personality that had been suppressed to accommodate your savior function begin to manifest with renewed vigor. This is one of the most beautiful ironies of human development. When you stop trying to save others, you frequently discover that you yourself become much more interesting, creative, powerful, and paradoxically, more capable of offering genuine support when appropriate. Because this support now comes from a place of abundance instead of need. The collapse of the savior archetype can also awaken a different form of compassion, a mature compassion. Instead of trying to alleviate the other person's suffering through your intervention, you develop the capacity to witness her suffering with love, knowing that some pains are necessary for growth and that your attempt to remove them might actually be preventing the evolution they were designed to catalyze. The fourth transformation is simultaneously the most subtle and the most radical. You develop ontological freedom, the ability to exist completely independent of any relational definition, even seemingly elevated spiritual definitions like someone's twin flame. It's as if you discovered a dimension of yourself that exists before any connection, that remains intact regardless of who enters or leaves your life, including people who awaken the deepest layers of your soul. Jung understood that one of the most advanced achievements of individuation is developing what he called existence from the self, where your fundamental identity doesn't depend on any role, relationship, function, or external recognition. Most people derive their sense of who they are through relational definitions. They're someone's children, someone's parents, someone's partners, employees of some company, members of some group. Even seemingly spiritual identities like twin flame can become a subtle form of existing through reference to another person. When you consciously break a soul contract, you're forced to discover who you are when you remove even the most significant spiritual identity you possessed. Who are you when you're no longer her twin flame? Who are you when you're no longer fulfilling a shared destiny? When you're no longer living a joint mission? When you're no longer being defined through a cosmic connection with another soul? This investigation can initially create a sense of existential emptiness, perhaps a confrontation with nothingness. You might feel that you've lost not only a special person, but also a fundamental narrative about who you are and why you exist. The story that gave meaning to your life, that explained your most transcendent experiences, that connected you to a greater purpose, was consciously discarded by you yourself. But it's exactly in this emptiness that ontological freedom is born. Jung discovered that when we remove all external definitions, including the most sublime ones, what remains is what he called the self, the indestructible essence of our existence that doesn't depend on any circumstances to be valid, complete, and meaningful. Ontological freedom manifests through a sense of inner solidity that's completely independent of approval, recognition, connection, or even external love. You discover that you can be deeply alone without feeling lonely, can be completely misunderstood without feeling invalidated, can live without any special romantic or spiritual connection without feeling incomplete. This discovery can be initially frightening because it challenges the fundamental belief that we need others to feel whole. Most people have terror of solitude not because they don't like themselves, but because they never developed an intimate relationship with their own essence. Breaking the soul contract forces you to develop this intimacy with yourself as a matter of psychological survival. Ontological freedom also includes a form of self-love that completely transcends the need for external validation. You learn to love yourself not because you're special, talented, attractive, or spiritually evolved, but simply because you exist. An unconditional love directed toward your own being, one of the rarest and most precious achievements of human development. This form of self-love isn't narcissism or self-indulgence. It's the recognition that your existence has intrinsic value that can't be diminished by any loss, failure, or rejection, including the loss of a connection you considered sacred. It's the understanding that you don't need to be loved by anyone specific to have the right to occupy space in this universe with dignity and joy. People who develop ontological freedom frequently become magnets for much healthier and more authentic connections because they're no longer relating from lack or need. They can love deeply without attaching, can connect intimately without losing themselves, can recognize kindred spirits without becoming dependent on them. Paradoxically, by giving up the need for any specific connection, they become capable of much more genuine and satisfying connections. Ontological freedom also allows for a form of gratitude that transcends circumstances. You can be grateful for the experience with your twin flame without needing it to have lasted forever. You can value what you learned through the connection without lamenting its end. You can honor the love you felt without clinging to the specific form it took. This transcendent gratitude is one of the clearest signs that you've completed the transformation of breaking the soul contract. You're no longer trying to make the experience different from what it was. You're no longer resisting the reality that some sacred connections come to awaken and then depart. You're no longer interpreting the end as failure or cosmic betrayal. The fifth and most extraordinary transformation that happens when you consciously break a soul contract is that you develop a transcendent mastery of unconditional love. You discover that you're capable of loving your former twin flame in a purer and deeper way precisely because you no longer need to possess her, be with her, or be reciprocated by her. It's as if, by renouncing the specific form you had hoped love would take, you gained access to the eternal essence of love that completely transcends people, circumstances, and outcomes. Jung understood that most human beings confuse love with attachment, desire with recognition, need with spiritual affinity. Even in connections that seem transcendent, like those between twin flames, there's frequently a layer of subtle possessiveness, a need for the other person to continue being who they were when you recognized each other, for them to continue feeling the same they felt, for them to continue being available for the dynamic you created together. When you consciously break the contract, you're forced to confront all these layers of attachment that were masked as spiritual love. You realize that part of what you called love was actually fear of loss, control disguised as care, emotional dependence presented as cosmic connection. This confrontation can be initially devastating to self-image, because it questions the purity of feelings you considered most sacred. But it's exactly through this brutal deconstruction of romantic illusions that transcendent mastery develops. When you remove all layers of need, expectation, attachment, and control, what remains is something Jung would recognize as love in its purest state, an unconditional appreciation of the other person's existence that doesn't depend on reciprocity, proximity, or any specific form of manifestation. Transcendent mastery manifests through the ability to genuinely wish for her happiness, even if that happiness doesn't include you, to celebrate her growth, even if that growth takes her away from you, to honor her choices, even when those choices cause pain in you. It's a form of love that loves the person more than it loves the idea of being with the person. This form of transcendent love is extremely rare, because it requires a death of the romantic ego that most people aren't willing to face. It's easier and more gratifying for the ego to believe that true love means being together forever, that special connections guarantee specific outcomes, that mutual recognition automatically translates into lasting partnership. Transcendent mastery of unconditional love also includes a form of forgiveness that goes far beyond conventional forgiveness. You don't just forgive your former twin flame for any pain she might have caused. You understand there's nothing to forgive. You realize that every choice she made, including choices that resulted in distancing or ending of the connection, We're part of the natural evolutionary process of two souls navigating the complex territories of human growth. This understanding extends to yourself as well. You stop blaming yourself for having broken the contract. Stop questioning whether you made the right decision. Stop punishing yourself for having chosen your own evolution, even when it meant giving up what you loved most. You recognize that your courage to leave was also a manifestation of love, a way of honoring the connection through the refusal to allow it to deteriorate into something lesser than its original magnificence. Transcendent mastery frequently results in a complete transformation of your ability to relate to other people. You become someone who can love without agenda, who can connect deeply without trying to change anyone, who can recognize beauty in others without needing to possess it. People feel inexplicably safe in your presence because they unconsciously perceive that you don't need them to feel complete. You've become a mature lover, someone who loves from abundance instead of lack, who offers genuine presence instead of control attempts, who celebrates others' individuality instead of trying to mold them to meet your own unresolved needs. This mastery can also awaken healing and guidance capacities you didn't know you possessed. Because you went through the process of consciously breaking a sacred connection and survived to discover that true love not only remained intact, but expanded to dimensions you didn't know existed, you become a beacon for other people navigating similar territories of loss, conscious choice, and spiritual transformation. Transcendent mastery of unconditional love doesn't mean you no longer feel pain or longing. It means you've developed the capacity to feel those feelings without resisting them, without trying to change them, without interpreting them as evidence that you made a mistake. You can feel longing for her and simultaneously be at peace with your choice to leave. You can feel intense love for her and at the same time have no desire to re-establish contact or reconnect romantically. Jung would recognize this ability to hold emotional paradoxes without trying to resolve them as one of the most advanced signs of psychological maturity. You've developed what he called the transcendent function not just intellectually, but viscerally, as a way of navigating life that embraces complexity instead of trying to simplify it. The most extraordinary aspect of transcendent mastery is that it frequently results in a sense of deep gratitude for the entire experience, including the decision to end it. You realize that both the encounter and the departure were equally necessary for your development, that you needed to experience the intensity of soul recognition, to develop the capacity to love transcendentally, and needed the courage to leave, to discover that this love exists independently of external circumstances. This gratitude extends to your former twin flame as well, not just for what she brought into your life, but also for having perfectly fulfilled her role in your growth, including the painful parts of that role. You understand that she was exactly what your soul needed to encounter to awaken capacities that might have remained dormant forever if you hadn't crossed paths. When you fully integrate these 5 transformations of consciously breaking a soul contract, something far beyond healing happens. You become an initiate of conscious love, someone who understands through direct experience that true love sometimes requires choices that challenge all romantic, spiritual, and social conventions. You've discovered that it's possible to love someone so deeply that you're willing to give them up so that both you and they can become more authentic and free versions of who you really are. You've discovered that some soul contracts include conscious expiration clauses, and that honoring these clauses can be as sacred as fulfilling the original contract. You've completed one of the most advanced individuation processes possible for a human being. You've learned to love without losing yourself, to connect without limiting yourself, to honor sacred bonds through your own ability to release when true love demands liberation. This isn't an achievement you reach to impress anyone or prove a point. It's a spiritual maturity you develop for yourself, because your soul knows it came to this life to learn ways of loving that transcend the limitations of ego, fear, possessiveness, and even spiritual contracts when they've already fulfilled their transformative function. If you've made it this far, if you've recognized your own impossible journey in the words I've shared, then you know that not everyone has the courage to consciously break a soul contract. Most prefer to remain in dynamics that no longer serve growth because at least they're familiar, predictable, because they feed the illusion that certain types of love protect us from the need to evolve. But you chose evolution, even when it demanded giving up what you loved most. You chose your own truth, even when it contradicted all the romantic narratives about soulmates who are destined to stay together forever. You chose to honor true love through the courage to liberate it when it asked to be liberated. Carl Jung taught us that the most courageous decisions we can make are those that force us to grow beyond who we were when we made them. And consciously breaking a soul contract, choosing individual evolution even when it means giving up the most intense connection you've ever experienced, can be one of the most courageous decisions a soul can make. You haven't failed in the twin flame journey. You've been graduated to a level of mastery and love that few human beings can achieve. A love that doesn't depend on reciprocity to exist, that doesn't need guarantees to flourish, that doesn't require possession to be genuine. And this mastery doesn't just transform you, but transforms all the people who are fortunate enough to cross your life from now on. Because you've become a living example that it's possible to love with the depth of a twin flame and still choose freedom when true love demands that choice. The universe doesn't punish those who have the courage to make conscious choices, even when these choices challenge seemingly sacred contracts. The universe celebrates consciousness, honors courage, rewards authenticity. And when you choose your own evolution, even when it means temporary solitude, you're demonstrating the kind of spiritual maturity that attracts even more extraordinary experiences into your life. Now, if you've understood that breaking a soul contract can be the greatest act of consciousness a soul can perform, then I need to tell you about something that can accelerate your transformation even more and help you fully integrate these 5 extraordinary changes you're experiencing. I've created some exclusive materials based on Carl Jung's deepest teachings for people who are navigating the most challenging territories of spiritual growth. The first is a practical 21-day guide that will teach you the most powerful techniques Jung developed to transform psychological trauma into spiritual wisdom. The second is a survival manual for those moments when even understanding the spiritual meaning of what you're experiencing, some days are still brutally difficult to get through. And the third is the complete guide that reveals the secret codes behind twin flame connections, based entirely on Jung's revolutionary discoveries about individuation and soul recognition. The links are in the description of this video. And now I want to know who really stayed until the end. Write in the comments, "I choose my conscious evolution," if you've recognized that your experience is part of a greater spiritual purpose, that you were chosen to develop specific capabilities you can now use to help other people navigating similar journeys. Thank you for being here. We'll see each other in the next video.